we heard from B&T. The first one is well, I think I see the people at the desk. We'll do 541 first, I think. So let's go to 541. That's the parks. But I guess we need April for that, huh?
Well, that's true for both of them.
Huh?
That's true for both of them. They're both April.
Yes. And I know, you know, when we have a voting session, I get the list of the bills out. I can't always offer amendments from myself or other people because they bring them up based on what's on the list. So we just have to continue and do the best we can with the best knowledge we have.
That's on parks.
Okay. Sorry, April. We're going to do 541. We're going to do 541, then we will come back to 348. We have people to assist us with answering questions on both bills, so we can let them go after they help us through this issue. I don't know how much Ms. Morton has to review the park bill, but if you know, 55 words or less.
All right, so as a reminder, this is the bill that we had sort of first taken up on Tuesday, coming to us as the secondary committee. This is the Natural Resources Maryland Park Service and State Parks Alterations Great Maryland Outdoors Act. I won't walk through all the budget and tax amendments again, but you should have the amendments and the reprint on your desk. As a reminder, this is the bill that, in general, is sort of implementing recommendations of the State Park Investment Commission that met over the interim. Sets up a couple of some new funding structures for state parks, and then establishes a number of sort of programmatic changes as well. So, in addition to the amendments from budget and tax, we discussed on Tuesday also, there is an amendment from Senator Elfreth, which should be hopefully somewhere, I think it might be in your, in the amendment, in the voting packet, which I don't seem to have on my desk.
Page 23, I believe. Is that it or not? No, maybe not.
That might be the budget and tax.
35.
Could I have a copy of that?
35.
Could you get one of those for April?
So yes, page 35. So this requires the Department of Budget Management to increase the number of full-time employees in the department by 100 permanent classified positions, and then it spells out what those positions are. And then finally, the last amendment that we have right now is being offered by Senator Ellis, and that was the amendment that Ian just passed around. This amendment adds a section to the part of the bill dealing with partnership parks, saying that it is the intent of the General Assembly that if the state acquires property in the Waldorf Core Zone for the purpose of making the property a state park, that the property shall be a partnership park established and maintained in a manner substantially similar to the requirements laid out in the bill.
Okay. There are also B&T amendments, as well as Elfreth amendments?
Right, so there's the big packet of B&T amendments, which, I mean, I can walk through those again, but
It's what we,
It's what we discussed on
Right.
Tuesday.
okay. Let's put the bill in front of us. Let's give some form to this. It's been moved, it's been seconded, and I want to use the same people for moving and seconding the B and T amendments as a starting point. Discussion of those amendments. And they are found on, I had it. Page 23 to 34, I believe. And that is what folks walked through yesterday. Take a minute,
Tuesday.
whenever.
I know, 3 years
Okay,
ago.
you have a question? You want to
I
talk? Okay. Vice Chair.
I think I'll toss this to Matt, if that's okay.
That's why he's here.
All right, on page 27, pages 27, 28, and 29, we talked briefly about this the other day. This is a little bit more of a procedural question. Hello, is that John Griffin? Hello, hello, welcome. Okay, so I think the idea of park rangers who are in wooded areas having a presumption for Lyme disease makes total sense, and I support it. And so getting rid of the other language makes total sense, and I support that. My musing or my wondering is, again, as someone who's working on workers' comp right now for 911 specialists, I'm wondering if Finance Committee is going to want to take a bite at this or have a look at this at all, since they're not primary or secondary. Because they're pretty much like the people on workers' comp, aren't they?
I think you're correct, and
Mike?
I do not have much experience with workers' comp or any at all. And so I haven't heard anything from finance as to whether they wanna chime in on this. We have a voting session in B&T, shortly this evening, and I can bring that up as to whether we want to involve finance. There's only so many committees that you can make secondary on
100%.
here.
Yeah,
And so,
I just wonder, it's a courtesy thing.
yep.
Sometimes it's, let's just check with B&T, so I wonder if there's a just run it past finance.
Absolutely, we will, I will make sure that the chair is aware of that, and he has a discussion with the finance chair before it goes to the floor.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks.
Further discussion. Any objection to adopting the B and T amendments? Seeing none, they're adopted. Then there are Elfrith amendments, let's take them next. We're going to work our way to you, Senator Ellis. Elfrith amendments on page 35, the 100 new positions. Page 35 and 36, discussion. Any objection? Seeing none, anybody wish to vote against adopting them? They're adopted. Senator Ellis amendment, which we didn't go through yesterday, either Senator Ellis or Ms. Morton, you want to just take 20 seconds and explain what it does?
So, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, the amendment 323 in the packet, I'm withdrawing that. That's on page 37 through 40 of the packet. I'm withdrawing that amendment. And so the amendment passed out by Ian a few minutes ago. I worked with the sponsor, and the sponsor, working with leadership, gave me this language. And I would like to move this amendment that Ms. Morton summarized a few minutes ago, which is 163424-1. Yes, correct.
Any debate, discussion, any objection to adopting the amendment? Seeing none, Senator Ellis, another for Senator Ellis.
Thank you.
Either other amendments or the bill as amended, we can have questions, we have an expert here, and we have debate. Other amendments?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Working with the sponsor and Mr. Bennett, I'd like to offer an amendment that we've agreed the language, but I don't have it to pass out. But if you look at, in the I guess this is the unofficial copy of Senate Bill 541. It would be on page 9 of 32. And near the bottom where it says letter N, the amendment would, it states, if the fund receives more than $70,000, the department may use up to $10,000 for any of the purposes identified under this subsection.
Is this on 24?
It's in your reprint page.
Reprint page 9, I'm sorry.
I apologize. So we're in the freestanding reprint.
Yes, the freestanding reprint.
Page, the numbered page 9.
Yes,
Okay.
near the bottom, letter N.
Got it. I'm sorry.
So I just wanted to add a few words here, given our conversation about the ability to, add a new structure if you have to. And so following the existing language, if the fund receives more than $70,000, the department may use up to $10,000 for any of the purposes identified on. Million. That's awesome. Okay, sorry, I'm really tired. 10 million for any of the purposes identified on the subsection. And so I would add, including land activation and new structures. Including, well, the email says land activation. What does that mean? Mr. Bennett?
I saw the language, and I assumed they intended acquisition, but I haven't seen activation used before.
Idea there, where I have heard that term used before, and I think it was sort of maybe discussed in the context of the State Park Investment Commission. It's this idea that we have property that we have acquired, the state has acquired for the purpose of state parks, but it's not really open to the public, there's no amenities on it, so I think that's activation is typically turn it into an actual state park.
And
Okay.
So, Senator, read it again, please.
at the end of $10 million for the purposes identified under subsection L of this section, including land activation and new structures. And this was the language that was sent to me by the sponsor.
So, I just have I think it's a legal question. It says identified under L, so it's implying that those two things are intended under L. Would that be my reading of the amendment?
Correct.
Yes.
Okay, so it's making clear they would fall under L, those two uses.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I assume it's been moved. I assume there's a second. Second discussion on the Hester Amendment via Elfreth, via who knows who. But debate on that. Senator Washington.
Yeah, I support the amendment, so that wasn't this was like after we do that.
Okay. Any objection to adopting the amendment? Seeing none, it's adopted. Other amendments? Senator Washington?
Oh, so I just wanted to let you all know that I did do a set of comprehensive amendments, but I'm working with the sponsor, and they'll probably be offered on the floor so that we don't slow any of this down, so.
Okay.
So they're just around, just clarifying, as I said, things like minorities and some of the hiring things, and so, very consistent with what I've said.
Let's hold on discussing it now. Okay, discussion or question for Mr. Bennett on the bill as amended? Senator?
I got some questions, and I think it went around to the whole committee on disabilities, and if there was any funding in here for projects in the parks and all that. So if you could address that. I know there's a lot of money in here, but they were concerned that there was no money allocated for disabilities when you're addressing this.
I don't think there's anything that's specific as to disabilities. However, the use of the money is quite broad, and.
Can you speak into the mic?
Oh, and the use of the money is quite broad, and the authorized uses in the special fund. And so I don't recall anything specific as to disabilities. April's looking at the bill now, so if anything jumps out at you, let me know. It was a big bill. But the authorized uses of those two funds is extremely broad, and there is access, trying to allow more people to get to the parks. And so I think the use, I think there would be opportunities to use that money for the type of use that you're asking about. It's just not specified in the bill.
The one piece that is in here, it does have language, it's not specifically tied to any of the funding provisions, but it does have language requiring the Park Service to adopt universal design principles in its programming and amenities to ensure maximum access by all people, including people with disabilities and seniors. It also requires them to ensure accessibility for individuals who are deaf, blind, or both, through the website and all other digital outreach, to adhere to Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.0, so to update their
So-
websites.
If they, and I'm assuming they, like, if they build bathrooms and things like through this, would they be required to do that under this language?
Well, so they'd already be required to do that under the
ADA.
public amenities, ADA. The bigger question, again, and this was something that was talked about in the group that met this interim, is things like, maybe creating a trail that is accessible to people in wheelchairs. So that requires maybe a boardwalk trail as opposed to, a sort of rough trail through the woods, and increasing opportunities and things like that create opportunities that don't currently exist and that aren't
And
required
is that
under
in the
law.
bill?
So that's what this, the universal design principles is about. And there's a lot of sort of intent language and language requiring the department to take that into consideration, but there's nothing, I don't think, specific saying that they have to build any of that.
Further discussion on the bill as amended? Will anybody wish to be recorded in the opposition? I didn't sense so. Okay, it'll be recorded as 10-0. Senator Riley had a situation at home. He had to leave us early. Okay, that bill is passed. We're going to go to the other one from B&T. Matt, I don't know if you want to stay for this or not. I don't know how much knowledge you have.
We are voting upstairs at 6:30, so
Okay.
I can come back down.
Okay, well,
Or is there
Mr.
specific-
Griffin has a fair amount of knowledge of this. Why
That's-
don't we, if we can replace Mr. Bennett, Mr. Griffin on the next bill.
Thank you.
This is 348.
All right.
Ms. Morton.
So this is Senate Bill 348, the Conservation Finance Act. This bill makes changes to a broad variety of existing programs related to environmental conservation and natural resources management, and expands opportunities for agencies to obtain private investment and financing for state environmental projects, including conservation efforts, restoration projects, and the installation and repair of green and blue infrastructure. So as a reminder, again, this is a bill that this committee is secondary on, but it is substantially the same as the bill that was passed by this committee last year. There are amendments from Budget and Tax. Again, they are in your voting packet, but there should be a reprint on your desk. So the amendments are on page 11 of the voting packet. The amendments just, because, so the bill sets, authorizes something called pay-for-success contracting, but it does so in the state finance and procurement article. The Maryland Environmental Service is not subject in general to the state finance and procurement article. They have but they have a lot of those provisions reproduced in their own law. So the Budget and Tax amendments would authorize the Maryland Environmental Service to use pay-for-success contracting as described in the rest of the bill.
Okay, one of the architects of the bill is John Griffin, who was former Secretary of Natural Resources here in Maryland and holding other positions as well. John, look, this is a fairly complicated bill. In about a minute or two, no, seriously,
Okay.
the purpose of the bill.
Sure.
And why it's here and what it's trying to do.
Fine. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee, great to be here again. In a couple of minutes, this bill tweaks a number of state statutes of several state agencies that in the aggregate, we hope will attract additional levels of private capital investment into restoration, climate resiliency, and related goals. The global investments and the investments in the U.S. in these spaces have skyrocketed. And so we want to attract Maryland's fair share of those as they grow and grow. So that's overall what the bill does. I mean, I should just say, historically, this bill has been 3 years in the making. And last interim, you all passed a bill here in the Senate, but it ran out of time in the House. They created a work group with all the stakeholders involved and developed a bill over the interim, which is a bill before you, and it's cross-filed in the House. Let's see.
I think I had Senator Washington, then Senator Simon Ayer.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, I hope you could answer some of these, because it seems like folks who know about it seem to be excited about it. So I want to understand it so that I can become excited. So one of the questions I had is that people refer to critics of our current regulatory theme said that there were regulatory barriers that stifle public-private project execution. What types of regulatory barriers existed?
Well, there is a provision in here which sets up a task force on blue and green infrastructure, and one of the charges to that task force is to examine current state and local laws and regulations
Okay.
that may be very dated and therefore
Okay.
have unintended consequences that slow up the process for restoration. That's one of the purposes of that. And to promote green and blue infrastructure, if you pass this bill, Maryland will be the first state in the country to define and authorize funding under current funding sources for blue infrastructure. And
So-
we've also improved the definition of green infrastructure. Does that help answer your question?
Yeah, that's definitely getting there, because it says that the bill creates an enabling environment for greater innovation and flexibility. So is there going to be a study of what barriers there are, and then there'll be
Yes,
changes?
and that's
or
what
do
that commissioner task force
Oh,
is
great.
supposed to do. And
Great,
then,
great, great.
of course, if they're legislative, they would recommend them back
Perfect.
here to the General Assembly. If they're at the local level, and they would share those with local governments.
Perfect. And then I have another one about blue infrastructure and
Yes.
green infrastructure,
Uh-huh.
and that they become standard terms. And it's saying that they're characterizing that saying that watersheds receive explicit characterization as infrastructure. So
Yes.
what does that allow us to do if we're able to call watersheds infrastructure under this? Yeah,
Good question. This based on a California statute
okay,
of several years ago, and other states are considering it, but the purpose of it is to try to elevate green and blue infrastructure, natural-based solutions to be equivalent with gray infrastructure. Now, we're always going to need gray infrastructure, obviously.
so
But,
would it allow us to think of it as capital? Is that what,
Yes.
so then, so you could you could
Yes,
get bonds? That's why
yes.
I tried to find out, is this a way to get financing? And it seemed like it was, but.
yes,
no
there's
one could tell me.
actually,
Yeah,
there's a very unused yet GASB, Government Accounting Board for state and local governments. They, several years ago, issued a series of regulations called GASB 62, and they included efforts to value and account for, and therefore finance, green infrastructure. And so there's a task force set up to really figure out how best to do that and to promote its use, these accounting standards, valuation standards by state and local governments.
and then in the way, and this is one of, in the way that there is a market for, I guess, in selling credits and financing, so you can create financial products that can be sold
Yes.
to private investors utilizing state Maryland land. Is that?
Well, or
Yeah,
private
or-
land, it's both, really.
Oh,
It's not-
yeah. Okay, that's good, because that's what it seemed like it, but I just didn't know
Sure.
which were the right words
Very
to
good
ask.
question, Sam.
Okay, thank you. And so, so the market, the investors, so essentially, these assets that we have will increase in value or et cetera, and then we'll be able to somehow sell, kind of the way we sell, where we sell around stormwater mitigation credits and other types of credits that we would get. Other entities need those credits so they can purchase them. So we'd be creating and participating in a market, a financing market based on green and blue infrastructure.
That's-
Is that what
that's
you're
part of
creating in
it.
this bill? Yeah.
Yes, that's
Okay.
part of what this bill does.
Okay, great. Okay.
And basically, okay,
Okay. Well,
Still at the 30,000 foot. So you talk about private capital getting invested. What is the private entity getting out of this, their investment?
well, you have environmental restoration companies, private companies,
Right.
who either finance projects with debt capital or with investment capital
So-
isn't debt. And so the growing number of investors and restoration companies rely on investment capital to do projects. And they are profited by that if they're successful. And to tie that in with the provision that was just mentioned, authorizing a new form of procurement called pay-for-success procurement, the real benefit there is the companies have to assume the risk of delivery. In other words, they have to put their capital up front, do a project, achieve the metrics that define success, and only then do they start to get reimbursed. So, I don't know if I'm.
So you have a restoration project, let's just say, so walk through the process, real high level. The state puts out a bid for it, and then private comes in, and you're saying they're investing part of it, or we give them money to do the project, or it's a joint effort?
It kind of depends. If it's an ecosystem market like carbon markets, which we don't have yet in Maryland, but this bill would incent the development of them on ag and forest lands.
John, give an example of something which could actually happen next year if this bill goes into place.
Sure.
Take it, just come up with a hypothetical
Yeah,
example.
oh, sure. Well, let me see, the Department of Natural Resources may want to do a very large-scale solicitation, competitive, to do stream restoration and related habitat improvements on 3 miles of waterways around the state. And so they'd put the solicitation out, private companies would compete for it, and the one who won it would then have to advance their own financing, debt or capital, to undertake the projects. And if they negotiate metrics in terms of what they have to do to succeed, and if they're done, then they start to get reimbursed. Normally, they get a pretty good chunk after construction is certified, as done according to the specs and done well. And the post-construction monitoring period can vary, but they have to pay for that. It's either 5 or mostly 5, sometimes 10 years of monitoring and repair. Is that
It sounds like, you know, the current process is you do an RFP or whatever, and you say, we're going to give $100 million for this project. We'll give you X money up front. As you meet milestones, we'll pay you more. And what I thought I heard you say is you're going to put the bid out, the company's going to come in, put all their money into it, and then they would get paid afterwards? Is it
Yeah.
just, why would a company want to do that?
Well, because there's obviously, if there are companies and they're efficient and they do a good job, they're going to make money. They'll make profit, just like any company government contracts with.
So it's just a different business model where the company takes relative risk to put the money up front knowing that they can do the job, and they'll
Right.
just get paid later?
Right. What I'm familiar with is a state agency may reimburse the company, let's say 75% once the construction of all the stream restoration projects are done and certified as done according to the bid specs. Then it's either 5 or 10 years, depending upon the agency's preference, where the company has to invest in ongoing maintenance and repair. And then every year that goes by during that post-construction period of monitoring and repair, they get an additional reimbursement unless the project has big problems, and then they've got to fix them.
So is the benefit to the state that they're paying the money later?
Yes, that's one of the benefits. The other benefit is they're getting greater scale because investors in these companies don't like small scale. They like large scale because you get the economies of scale, you get lower unit costs. So most of these companies are very competitive on the cost side. The government doesn't have to assume the risk of failure of projects, because that assumption of risk is on the part of the companies and their investors.
And you said, and this will be my last question,
No, that's okay.
but you said they would perform maintenance, so they basically not own, but are responsible to keep that riverbank or whatever in working shape or for maintenance.
Yes, to maintain the,
And then a contract would be on, they would get a certain amount of more money each
Right.
year for that.
and some of them following the highly regulated mitigation bank market, leave a percentage in a wasting fund for a third party, like a nonprofit, to maintain it beyond that 5 to 10 year period. I don't know, am I making any sense?
Could do that now, like, you could put out a $100 million contract, they could come in and do it and so forth. And I guess you're saying the economy of scale, but, I mean, they already can do that today with the economy of scale, putting a big project out there. I'm just trying to think what the motivation is of the company to say to put my capital up front and risk.
Because of the risk reward.
So are we paying more?
No, normally, not all the time, the efficiencies that these companies have developed and use end up being lower unit prices than other comparable ways of getting the same work done.
So the pay for success model and what you're getting, are these projects producing carbon and water quality credits?
It depends on the
Right.
purpose of it.
So for example, one could do a very large project, and then over time, so the project is said it's going to produce 100 carbon credits and 200 water quality credits,
Right.
you know, over a period.
Right.
Right? And then each year, if you meet that model, what they said, those credits will accrue, right? And so and then those credits can be sold on the market, right? For people who are looking for, like, I
Yes.
guess, how do they turn into commodities? So those credits get turned into commodities, right?
Correct, and
And
that's-
that's how they make money,
And the
right?
statute defines an environmental commodity.
Yeah, so it's not, our idea about, you know, making money on a job, it's making money on the environmental
Right.
market for buying of credits, where another larger project, they want to build a parking lot somewhere, and they need to use some credits, so they can buy some credits for that. I mean,
Well,
it's
that
not
gets
that
more
bad,
into the
but-
mitigation world where you're
Yeah,
offsetting.
yeah, but I'm paralleling that, because
Yeah.
that was my experience with water quality, so we did water credits, so
Sure.
but that's what we're doing
I mean,
with
in
this.
some cases with carbon offset
Yeah,
credits or selling them
Yeah.
is not necessarily, they're selling them to
Yeah.
large institutions which
Yeah.
need them to meet their
their
goals for zero.
Right, and so we're facilitating, so when they buy that big project, they're gonna
Right.
be able to accrue these credits.
Right, on water
Okay.
quality.
Great.
You know, a lot of states and state government agencies and local governments.
Yeah, but let me, John, let me get back to, I think we need a clearer answer for Senator Simon Ayer.
Sorry.
The risk reward, we want to be clear on what the reward is that's going to drive them to put their money up front. Now, you said these are larger projects, the economy of scale means their margin is better. How else do they get a greater reward that encourages them to put their money up front instead of the state money? Simply, I mean, as simply as you can. Senator, is that? Yeah, I mean, look, I understand from your experience what had been in place had not been working well, and you've heard from the private sector that they'd rather do this different model. But if you can just verbalize what other rewards are in it that are encouraging them to put their money up front.
Sure. Well, I guess these private capital investment markets are growing, as I said, particularly in this space, environmental restoration, climate, carbon offset credits, et cetera. So they're looking for places that are setting the right signals to invest their funds in. And, you know, they're going to invest in this, they're going to invest in something else. Some of this started in the social arena with, you know, social pay for success, but it's graduated more now to the environmental field because investors and the companies think it's a little more predictable set of factors to deal with than achieving social outcomes, which get very complex. Yeah, they're just seeking out these kinds of projects.
So it's more enticing to people when they get in the market?
Sure, absolutely. That's exactly what's going on, not just in the United States, but around the globe.
Okay.
I don't know if that helps at all, Senator, but.
Okay. Further discussion on the bill. We do have amendments or not?
Yes.
Okay. Let's assume the bill is before us. It's been moved, it's been seconded. The amendments are from the committee?
The amendments are from Budget and Tax, and they, as I previously stated, they just allow the Maryland Environmental Service to use pay for success contracting as outlined in the bill.
Okay. I'm going to assume that's been moved and seconded. It's before us. Discussion on the committee amendments. Any objection to adopting the committee amendments? They're adopted. Other amendments on this financing bill? Seeing none, on the bill as amended, discussion.
Budget and
We're
Tax is
second.
followed.
I think Hershey's going to get up there.
thank you for this, because I wondered, I asked about it, and it seemed to me to be a way for us to do some really good, big, bold things, utilizing credits and being able to use our asset and commodify them. So I think that makes a lot of sense. I support this bill. It's very creative, and you're absolutely right. It's been used in the social enterprise space around return for performance and all kinds of things, and it has allowed us to, people to do, to have capital, use private capital to do public good. This is one of those models. So, yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for
Not at
that.
all.
Would anybody wish to be recorded in the negative on this bill? If not, that'll go back to B&T with the amendments 10-0. Next, we have
Thank
three.
you very much, Senator.
Thank you, John.
Chair.
Thanks for the work on this. We have three withdrawn bills, 281, 352, and 498.
Move unfavorable.
It's moved and seconded. Discussion. Anybody objecting to the unfavorable? You can cross them off your list.
Colleagues, I'm just going to say 281, the comptroller finally, after 15 years in office, finally is stepping up on some sort of procurement portal, or payment portal, so that's why I withdrew the bill.
Okay, I'm going to try to dispose of. Yes, sir. There's not a W on 281.
But I
That
just
plus
made
the
the
two
motion.
other Ws,
Yeah.
withdrawns. Senator Ellis, on 818, I think Ms. Morton explained that the fiscal note was highly inflated because it reflected thinking they had to do an assessment with a consultant on every agency. That's wrong, and we're going to put an amendment to make it very clear to get rid of the fiscal note. The problem is, we got to clear it with B&T because it did have a fiscal note. So I'm going to hold that till we get clear on with B&T. But I don't think it should fly. Well, it should move. The financial thing should be taken out of it, so that should be a non-issue. But we have to have better communications with upstairs on that bill. So 818 is a hold until early or middle of next week. Okay, let's go to 306. That's Ms. Foxworth.
Senate Bill 306, dental hygienist consultation requirements, healthcare practitioners. This bill alters the consultation procedures for dental hygienists by requiring the dental hygienist who practices in the specified facilities, including government-owned dental facilities, public health departments, federally qualified health centers, assisted living programs, nursing homes, clinical offices, or group homes, to consult with either a nurse practitioner, a midwife, a treating physician, a supervising dentist, or the patient's dentist, instead of requiring the consultation to include either the supervising dentist, patient's dentist, or a treating physician. And these consultation requirements have to be adhered to if there's a change in the patient's medical history. The bill renames medical office to be clinical office and expands the office to include meeting these new requirements. And it also expands the role to include postpartum care. The facility is responsible for ensuring that these consultation requirements are adhered to, as opposed to the actual practitioner. There are sponsor amendments that are included in the packet. They are affixed to a reprint from the House, so they do conform to the House. And so they begin on page 8. And these sort of restore current law by requiring the facility to ensure that the dental hygienist does consult with a supervising dentist or patient's dentist, and they can also consult with one of the medical professionals that were added to the bill, including midwife and nurse practitioner. It also changes the term medical history to medical condition. Sorry?
I noticed that. Just curious, what's the distinction between medical history and medical condition, please?
Consensus between Maryland State Dental Association. I didn't interrogate the distinction between them. I'm not sure if it's a technical thing or if it's of much import more than a technical minutia point. But in code, there isn't a distinction between history and condition. It's just a word.
Sure. I think, history is kind of the conditions that the person's had up to this point, and so that may affect, their current drug regimen. It may affect the tests that you might want to run, et cetera, et cetera. The condition is what they actually have right then. Right? Yeah. Right.
Put the bill before us. Senator Lamb moves, Vice Chair seconds. Let's put the amendments that conform to the House bill in front of us. On the amendments. Senator Carozza on the amendments?
The bill.
Would you like to have them asked, or should we adopt the amendments?
I'm okay with adopting the amendments.
Okay, any objection to the amendments? Seeing none, the bill is amendments before you, Senator Carozza.
I was looking through the testimony. There was a Maryland State Dental Association favorable with amendments, and then the Board of Dental Examiners talked about their concerns. So I was trying to understand, and again, I have a local dentist that I have not had the opportunity to run these amendments by her, but I'm trying to see if those address some of the issues that were raised in the testimony during the hearing.
If I recall correctly, the Board of Dental Examiners had a general concern with liability and avoiding the requirement or permitting these dental hygienists to practice without consulting with the supervising dentist. So as the bill was drafted, that would have been the case and would have merited their concerns, but with the amendments, they do now have to consult with the actual dentist again. And with MSDA, as far as they're concerned, they were integral in the process of amendments in the House. So I'm sure their sign-off is.
You're saying their amendments were adopted?
So, yeah, these are the same amendments as the House. And as I understand, they were a large part of the amendment process.
And where are they in the packet, these amendments?
They are on page 8.
Thank you.
Senate Bill 355, HIV prevention drugs, prescribing and dispensing by pharmacists and insurance requirements. We passed this bill 2 weeks ago, had to move to finance, and it is back from finance with one technical amendment to add Senator Hayes as a co-sponsor. Nothing substantive.
Senate Bill 362, Primary and Secondary Education, Virtual Schools Revisions. This bill changes the requirements for a local board of education or the Maryland State Department of Education to establish a virtual school and sets requirements for students, teachers, and services at a virtual school. A local school system is limited to establishing one virtual school. However, the department may authorize a local school system to establish a second virtual school on a showing of just cause. A virtual school may not include classes for pre-kindergarten or kindergarten students. The department or a local board of education may contract only with a nonprofit organization to provide services for a virtual school. A teacher preparation program must include instruction on training in the skills and techniques for teaching effectively in a virtual learning environment. By December 31st, 2022, the state superintendent of schools must report the appropriate balance of synchronous and asynchronous learning. There's a substantial amount of amendments. You have a separate packet that's listed as your virtual schools amendment packet to make it easy for you to find. There's 4 amendments in that packet. So the first set begins on page 1, and these are Senator Pinsky's amendments. And the reprint begins on page 7, which will be easier to follow along if you're interested. So what these amendments do is repeal MSDE's authority to establish a virtual school. It alters the definition of virtual school. It provides that provisions in the bill to apply to a specific program or don't apply to a specific program. It authorizes a county board to establish one virtual school per grade band instead of just one virtual school. It grants MSDE authority to revoke a virtual school under specified conditions. It prohibits contracting with a for-profit entity only to operate or administer a school, but not from providing goods or services to the virtual school. I think I saw something circulating that would trying to say that for-profits were not allowed to provide any services or goods, and that's not accurate, according to the language. It authorizes MSD to provide a waiver to the school, to the student per school cap. So in the bill, it says that only 10% of students from any one school can attend the county's virtual school. But there is a waiver provision that says the department can waive that 10% cap for just cause. It provides some conditions for students in a virtual school to access extracurricular and sports activities at their zone school. It requires the social emotional wellness component to be interactive. It requires MSDE and county boards to adopt policies for when a student is mandated to return to in-person learning from a virtual school. It modifies teacher provisions to include other education support professionals. It revises the class size provisions. And it authorizes the state superintendent to assign duties related to the oversight of virtual schools to the appropriate office or division within the department, and provides for certain duties and authorizes the establishment of an advisory committee to assist that carrying out those duties. Further, it requires MSDE to collaborate with local school systems regarding determining the appropriate balance of synchronous and asynchronous learning hours. And it provides a short-term grandfather clause to allow existing programs to operate through the 23-24 school year.
These amendments were an amalgam of conversation with MABE, with PZAM, with the state superintendent, and a number of other people. Many of their suggestions were taken, I would say, actually, majority of them. So the bill, again, was set to put some guide rails in place, just like we did for charter schools, to make sure it's high-quality instruction program. The teachers who teach in it are not abused with super large class sizes. The state superintendent wanted language to say that if a virtual school is in the bottom 10% for 2 straight years, they can come in and say.
So that's their amendment. Your amendment says that
1 year.
they have the authority to revoke in the 10% if it's 1 year.
Okay, and there are a couple of amendments coming, but again, it's to ensure quality of the instruction in these virtual schools. And we went from 1 school to 1 per grade band, and they can apply to the state board if they can show reason to add more. So that's the amendments and what the bill does, and I or Ms. Goodman would be happy to answer any questions. Oh, do you want to, why don't you go through
Okay.
the other amendments?
All right. So following Senator Pinsky's amendments in the reprint, starting on page 16, there are a set of amendments offered by Senator Rosapep. There's a reprint of his amendments starting on page 22. Senator Rosapep's amendments authorize a county board to enter a written contract with another county board that has a virtual school to allow the other county's students to attend that virtual school instead of establishing a separate virtual school. It strikes cultural from the list of items the county board should consider when determining student enrollment. It establishes a Maryland Virtual Schools Network in the department to oversee the operations of virtual schools and online education in the state and promote best practices. It establishes a quality online education grant program to be administered by the network. This is unfunded. And establishes a quality online education advisory committee in the department.
And as a new department and new employees at the State Department of Education.
Correct.
Okay, let's go to the other amendment.
On page 32 of this packet is a letter from the State Board of Education, and they request that the county boards retain the authority to offer a kindergarten-level program at a virtual school. Apparently, there's existing programs that appear to be successful, and the state board, not the department, has requested this change. And finally, the last amendment on page 33 of the packet is from the department, and they've asked to revise the language regarding revocation to say, to authorize, to mandate the revocation of a virtual school if it performs in the bottom 10% of schools as determined by the metrics of the state accountability system for 2 consecutive years.
Okay, let's put the bill in front of us, moved, seconded, let's put the Penske amendments in front of the committee, moved and seconded. Now, I spoke with Senator Rosapep today briefly on the floor. I took a few of his ideas and included them. We added the language to make it explicit about services and goods by a for-profit could take place. It just couldn't run a school. We don't want to have a for-profit school. I added that, and that's in the Penske amendments. I added the superintendent to assign to someone in the appropriate department to be the coordinator for virtual schools, but not to add 4 pins to do it. And I also included his idea to encourage that person to create an advisory committee to help him or her. And so I incorporated some of them, not all of them. I didn't take his forward and 8 whereases and create a whole new department. So they're the Penske amendments. We're going to take the other amendments in a moment, and I'm going to welcome 1 or 2 of them as friendly amendments. I'm not sure who I had first. Well, I'm sorry, the amendments are before us. It doesn't mean, I'm calling on you now.
Mr. Chair. And the reason I've been anxious to speak on this is that I really believe this is one of the most important education bills that this committee is going to consider. And we had a very in-depth hearing where we were walked through, and in that hearing, I did raise the issues of how this would impact the Eastern Shore of Maryland Educational Consortium, pointing out that it was a blended virtual program, multi-district and not a school. And in that vein, during the hearing, the chair agreed to speak to Dr. Andes and has done so, and has also worked with other partners where these amendments have come. Fast forward, at this point, this work is being done in the committee. I did not have any update on that other than, trying to follow up with Dr. Andes. Last night, before the voting list came out, word was that this bill was going to be on the voting list. So I tried to scramble to find out, well, what are we working off of? Because I had heard that there were some amendments in the event that I could offer an amendment or work with the committee to address some of the concerns that were raised in the hearing. The vote list came out this morning confirming this bill was on. We've been, then we get these amendments now, which I'm really trying to, which I know it's been a combination, but trying to digest and understand, what they will mean, and having the courtesy of going back to working with the Eastern Shore of Maryland Educational Consortium and the other stakeholders, the PASAM, the superintendents and others. So I'm respectfully requesting a hold to have the opportunity, first of all, to truly understand the amended bill and then to try to not only understand it, but to see, how we can best see how we can move forward with the Eastern Shore of Maryland Consortium. I think it's a reasonable request. And quite frankly, I had hoped by sending some emails out and raising this issue that I would have been more involved in the process to see if the students involved with this in this system, this multi-district, 7 out of the 9 counties of the Eastern Shore that are involved with this. So that's why I'm asking for a hold and to be able to work through the issues that they've raised. So I'd appreciate that courtesy, Mr. Chair.
Senator, we're over halfway in, and I said we're not guaranteeing holds after a certain point. And I have to tell you, we had this hearing a couple of weeks ago, and many people have chimed in to say what they liked, what they didn't like about the bill. And we have actually accommodated a lot of them, and I actually accommodated Dr. Andes. He said, look, we might not fit in your new criteria. I understand that. Do I have to close it down? And I said, look, I don't know if you fit the new criteria or not. But this is the policy we're discussing. But I said, John, I will go to the committee and say, we'll give you an extra year. So I don't want to shut you down. So I'm getting pushback saying we shouldn't give anybody an extra time to do this. So I promised him we'd give him an extra year. Now, if they fit the criteria, if they fit the criteria, they can continue to work. Let me finish. If they don't fit the criteria that we think is the right policy, class size, look, they are a for-profit operation running it. We do not allow for-profits to run our charter schools in the state of Maryland. Our public schools are not run by corporate companies. I asked him, do the teachers make the same amount of money as the other teachers in the affected counties? Do they get the same benefits? He said, they told us yes or probably. I said, would they show you their books? He said, no, they're a proprietary company. They don't have to. They're making a profit, and I want to make this comparable to the charter school. And if they can find a nonprofit to run it, that's great. So, again, it's like if the shoe fits, wear it. And I think we should be discussing the policies of how we run virtual schools. And if they fit in it, that's great. If they don't, not great. But we don't set policy just to maintain an operation, which might not be effective. And I have to tell you, anecdotally, I haven't heard great things about it. But I still want to give it a year because I promised a guy I don't want to put them out on the street, those kids. And I think we owe more to the children of the state in the Eastern Shore than we do to the for-profit company that's running it. So that's my response. What I am willing to do, although it's against my better judgment, Senator, because we are big boys and girls that we've got to discuss policy, and at the end of the day, it's on us, not all the stakeholders, and we don't always have a chance to go back and share it with them. And in fact, most of these amendments will actually make it more approving to them. This did not strengthen the bill. It actually took in all their ideas. What we will do today is take up all the amendments, vote them, reject them, and we will hold a final vote. And so early next week, if you have an amendment, we'll keep it open to an amendment. But we're not going to stop the process to check with every stakeholder every time the bill comes up. So I will take a response, and then I'm going to go to other questions from people or debate.
Mr. Chair, as we've been sitting here trying to understand the amendments that we're seeing for the first time, I'm getting texts now to say, okay, well, maybe I had an amendment, but then they're saying, well, maybe now, based on the new information that you're just seeing now, you can, amend this and see if that's something you can work with the chair on. I haven't had that opportunity. We're right here in the middle of a voting session. So it's just, part of it is, there's obviously the shared goal for our students' education, but it's, part of this is how can I put together a realistic amendment when you're seeing we're seeing for the first time your amended version of the bill.
Well, and I'm seeing one, I don't want to prolong.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just before we move on, I do have a question on your amendments. So we are going to go through these and then we're going to hold the bill, is that what you just said?
We're going to vote on the amendments, to accept or reject or amend the amendments, and before we take a final vote, we will hold it. So there can be any further amendments that from all the stakeholders who still aren't happy, can bring to us, and we'll accept or reject them early next week, and then we'll take the final vote. But we're not going to freeze the process.
Right, no, that makes perfect sense. Thank you very much.
But it's open to question. I mean,
Right, no, I do have questions. But first, I would like to, thank you for all the hard work that you've put into this and for taking the time to look through all that feedback. So, on your amendments, the very first amendment, repealing the authority of the State Department to establish a virtual school, could council clarify where, I'm trying to see where that is.
If you look on page 8, it says on line 24, it says virtual school means a public school established, and where it used to say by the department or by a county board, we have taken out department. And then it's made conforming changes throughout the rest of that subtitle.
and for an explanation, Senator, on the charter school law of the state, it has the 24 jurisdictions as a chartering authority and not the state. And so I wanted to make it parallel. I mean, I don't think they have any intent to start chartering virtual schools, but I thought it should be left to the local jurisdictions like we do with charters.
Okay, so I'm not sure that this was in the original bill. Do you know if the state superintendent supports this specific amendment?
I don't know.
Okay.
Did we talk about it?
I did, and they have no objection.
Next question.
Okay, so when we go through these amendments, are we going to be voting them as a package or up or down? Because I would like to have this one voted separately.
You can do it however you want to do it, Senator.
Okay, so,
Okay, let's start with that. Is it-
I mean, I think this is a very, it's a big decision. I don't want to see a ton of these schools. I know the state schools in other states have been terrible. Some of them have been good. I mean, I hold out hope that we could have the best state online school, if we wanted to. It was not, I mean, I know we can't check with everybody, but this amendment number 1 is a very big amendment, and I do not feel comfortable voting in the affirmative for it at this point in time.
Okay, again, we checked with the deputy superintendent today, and they had no objection. So that's all we can tell you. And the locals don't care. I mean, if this is about the state superseding their authority, we don't allow it in the charter schools. If anybody would want it and demand it, would be the state, and the deputy said they don't care. I don't know what else to tell you. But we can have a vote on it. On the amendment to leave the chartering of virtual schools to the 24 jurisdictions. And, I'm sorry. Okay, well, let's just take a vote. To leave it to the 24 instead of the 24 and the state. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay? No. Okay. Next. Okay, roll call.
Aye.
Senator Williams? Senator Hester?
Okay.
Just so I understand, and I don't know if it's in, I think it's in the amendment where we're talking about the for-profit and nonprofit. And I know there's been some history, and I probably don't know all of it, but I know in the higher ed, we've had some problems with for-profits. And this is a sincere question. So the way I look at it is we want the best product for the children, and you can put guardrails up. So why would we not want to put a for-profit if they're doing a good job and we can monitor it? Seriously.
A couple of reasons. One, historically, during the charter school movement, there were a lot of examples of for-profit schools that took the money, had a bad product, and went under. And to be a for-profit, if you're spending the same amount of money, you've got to increase the profit margin. So you got to cut corners somewhere to make your profit, which means you either pay your teachers less, you give less services, or whatever. And I guess the question becomes, do we want to potentially put a situation where our students are being taught by an operation that has one of their elements to be a profit-making operation, and that's in the mix with having successful student outcomes? And I think, just like we did in the charter schools and saying in the state of Maryland, we're not going to have for-profit, we can have nonprofit. They don't have to be the government. And so we have, 50, 55 charters in the state. I guess 30 or 35 or so in Baltimore, 10 or 11 in Prince George's, and another 5 or 6 scattered across the state that are running, and some have made it and some didn't make it. But we've been doing it without allowing for-profit to be a possible challenge. So.
I would think, you don't want to cut corners, you want them to have a good education, but I would also think with a smaller for-profit organization, you don't have the overhead that a big bureaucracy like state government has, so you could save money that way. And it would seem we'd be focused more on the output of what we're getting for our children if there's a viable product. I mean, we use for-profit in the school for all kind of things, whether it's buying furniture or books or computers, and we don't have a problem with that. I'm just trying to draw what's the distinction of for-profit for that versus the teaching? I mean, and you could put something in there as far as they have to have a certain percentage that they give the teachers or something, but I'm trying to see the distinction.
So again, I hope we have an opportunity to reconsider that last vote, but we had, there was, when we did the charters, this idea that, private entities or other entities other than traditional public schools can do a better job. And fortunately, Maryland did not go the private charter path. School systems that have, so for example, Philadelphia, have been bankrupted by the for-profit charters. Charter schools are traded on the stock exchange because now they are an investment. So when we introduce for-profit, when it has to do with our parks, et cetera, I guess that's one thing. But when it has to do with the education of our children, it doesn't necessarily result in a better outcome. And in fact, privatization in terms of certainly the charter was absolutely, awful. So I don't think that we should experiment and hope that somehow for-profit entities for virtual schools will somehow be different when they have the same profit objectives. So I think we should just stick to as it is, so.
Understand.
Okay, on the first set of amendments, Senator Hester.
Okay, so I think you addressed this, though, Senator Pinsky. I know you've done, a lot of work on this. In your amendment, don't you change it to?
Page 10, I think you're looking for,
Yes.
on line, starting on line 9. So the county board can't be operated or administered by a for-profit entity, but that provision can't be construed to prohibit purchasing goods and services for the virtual school from a for-profit entity.
So could they purchase a class?
Yes, but they can't purchase the teacher.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Okay. The Pinsky amendments, minus the role of the state, is in front of us. Further discussion? Further discussion? Seeing none, would anybody like, the motion is to adopt the Pinsky amendments minus that one change. Anybody object to that? Okay, the vote is 9-1. Then let's go to, I'm sorry? Yeah, let's go to the state superintendent's amendment on 8-1. I'm sorry, that was 8-1. Well, we don't track the amendment. The amendment passed. Where's the 2-year provision they recommend?
Oh, that's the last page?
Okay, 33, the state superintendent's office would like to say they can shut it down if there are 2 years where it's failing miserably. And I'm fine with that. I have no objection.
So that's not discretionary, that would be a mandatory?
I was just going to accept their amendment.
Okay, I was just making clear that that would be mandatory.
Okay, well, it's up to the committee. I mean, if they, yeah, okay. I mean, they're suggesting, no, she said it. If it has 2 years in the bottom 10% of all the schools in the state, that they can shut it down.
May revoke it after 1 year. Shall revoke after 2 years.
Yes. I mean, it's up to committee. Look, I felt for too long, there were charter schools that were failing in Baltimore City, and the kids were getting crushed. And then they fall back in the public school, and the public school's got to make the change. Now, one of the former superintendents finally stepped in, and he did close some. I can't remember. Who was it? Like 3 superintendents ago. So I think we wait too long on this. But it's up to the committee. I'm fine with it, but if they want to keep the existing language, that's fine too. Senator Washington.
Question, so it's, if they have a problem 2 years in a row, then they automatically lose their ability to operate? Is that
Right.
is that
In the bottom 10% of all schools in the state.
for 2 years in a row?
Right.
And the existing legislation says 1 year. I'm trying to remember.
Legislation says they have the discretion if the school's in the 10%. And
after
My-
1 year.
Not more, yeah.
They have the discretion after 1 year is what I had in the bill.
Correct.
This bill goes further and says after 2 bad years.
Presumably, that's because they can look at the school and decide whether, with an overall picture, it should get a second chance. Or at 2 years, though, they're probably assuming that there's not as much of a chance.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. I'll think about it.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. So quick question, with that bottom 10%. Is there any way, any county, statewide rule, we apply that shutdown rule to brick and mortar schools?
So brick and mortar schools obviously to have many different operational considerations than a virtual school would have. I mean, you're talking about several hundred children, you're talking about a building, you're talking about many, many other operational. So in regulations, there's a 3-step process. They have to be identified, and then they have to, once they've been identified, then they have to go through a process of correcting, and then there's a restructuring process. So there's a multi-layered process for brick and mortar schools.
Well, could we apply that multi-layered process to a virtual school? I mean, if they're trying and they need more help, could we use the same standard?
That's a policy decision for this committee.
On this issue, so it's possible that Senator Ellis and I might be, but I don't want to assume that you're in the same place I am. I'm struggling that it used to be that there were proposals by some folks to do a teacher merit pay, and the question was, some teachers are in schools that have kids that are harder to teach for whatever, all the reasons that we all know about language access or not having parents who are home to teach them or whatever it is to help them. And I think as policy, we have thought that was a bad idea. What I don't know about this, and I'm not sure I love the whole idea of virtual schools because I think it's been hard on kids, and I mean, so I don't start off loving any of this. But what I worry about is this the kids or the teachers that we'd be punishing? And if the teachers or the administrators are failing after a year or 2 years, then maybe that's fixable with new teachers or new administrators. If it's the students who aren't flourishing in a virtual school, then maybe should they go back to brick and mortar, but not shut it down when it's working for others? So this is the first time I'm speaking on this bill, but this amendment on its face seems common sense, but reflecting on it, I'm not sure I like it at all. And I think it reinforces kind of part of the problem and part of the digital divide and part of the gaps in everything we've been seeing.
Yeah. Well articulated, thank you.
On the amendment, I just wanted to associate myself with the double standards that I think we have with virtual and the bricks and mortar. So I would agree with a consistent approach.
The existing bill and with this amendment, so this says they will revoke the approval. What's the on-ramp again to open up a new one? I mean, is this, they're banned forever to have virtual, or the next day they can start a new one? I mean,
Process where the department has to approve the plan from the locals before they can begin operation of a virtual school. So if it gets shut down, presumably if they want to reopen a different school, maybe a different grade band or whatnot, they would have to present a plan to the department, and the department would have to approve that.
okay, so just go through approval
Right,
process.
it's not a next day.
And it's not shutting
situation.
everything down, it's just shutting that one school. Yeah.
Correct.
Right now, they have to apply to the state to get a code, a number code, to be formed as a school. I mean, if one county wants to do a new school and say, we need a new elementary or middle school, I think pro forma, they got to go through the state, get a number assigned to that school, whatever. So again, we have language that says if a student's not doing well, there should be assessment, and if they don't do well, they should go back to their traditional school. We don't want kids to fail. I mean, that's clearly, so that's in the bill. In terms of whether we should do a may or shall, like I said, this came from them. Where's the language in the bill?
That's on page 3. Around line 4.
So the language in the original, well, that's underlined. Was that not in the original?
Let's see here. Page 3. So, yes, on page 10 in your packet, around line 4, it says, "The department may revoke approval of virtual school if during the previous school year, the virtual school performs in the bottom 10% of schools as determined by metrics of the state accountability system." That is in your amendment.
Okay, and which we adopted. So right now, they may do it if it's in the 10%. They are asking for may during the first year and shall during the second year.
May is what you have in your,
Correct,
they're just asking to add the shall.
for the second year. It's whatever the committee wants to do. I think I heard from, he wants to reject the amendment. I think Senator Ellis would oppose the amendment.
Well, I just would love to, have the, even the virtual school kind of step up their standards. So, I have a question. So,
Sure.
when they say, on page 33, paragraph 3.2, performance in the bottom 10% of schools, is that statewide or the statewide?
Yes.
For that level, if it's a high school, it's
Yeah.
bottom 10% of all the high schools, bottom 10% of middle or elementary.
Yeah. So if you have school in a low-performing district where students are struggling, you would think they will automatically be close to that 10% without an opportunity to bring up. And so you would shut down those schools as soon as they open. It seems like it would be an automatic thing. And so, it's like they're failed before they even start. 2 years. Well, yeah, 2 years. So, from a business perspective, it takes between 3 and 5 years for any business to really turn a profit. No matter how great the idea is, no matter how much capital they start with, it takes that time to really get footing on a business or a nonprofit, or it could be a medical office, doesn't matter. It just takes that time generally. And so I'm thinking we wouldn't give them a chance if we adopt this amendment to just shut them down to the bottom 10%.
Yeah. Senator, again, if we want to reject this, I'm not fighting it because it wasn't my language.
Okay.
But I would say this, we're talking about kids. And these are virtual schools, and we have traditional schools, which I, like the vice chair, I think that should be socialized and be interacting with kids of different classes, races, whatever. I'm not a big fan of this, but I want to allow it for however it works for those people, just like charter schools. Not a big fan, but they have in Baltimore City for different reasons, and so I don't want to stop it, but I want to put some clear parameters. I don't want kids suffering, and then they come back to traditional schools. So I think it's a little different than a bricks and mortar school, as I think it was Vice Chair said. I just don't want, 10%, in other words, of the rest of the schools in the state, in that county, whatever. It's near the bottom. And if it's not working, it's not working. And so I don't want the kids to suffer. So I don't care how we do this. I think I'm going to take your motion that we reject the amendment.
And we'll go back to your recommend of May.
Yes.
So I like
Okay.
that.
Anybody object? Senator Washington?
I guess for information, closing schools doesn't produce better outcomes for children. There's been multiple studies of that. So now it would be a may after a year, I'm sorry, I'm not, I should be looking at it. It's after a year they may, or 2 years after they may. After a year they may. And the comparison is with all schools in the state or within the school within their zone? Because I do think the issue that some schools already start out at the bottom 10th, so it should be compared to the zone school. Or the schools in I'm just not. I don't know. I mean, I actually don't, to me, there's a larger problem of depending on the jurisdiction in which the school, so for example, you could have okay, we all know that Howard County has, in terms of ranking, et cetera, has some of our best schools. So you could have a really poor virtual school in Howard County, but it's not going to ever be in the bottom 10%. Like even their worst performing school isn't going to do that. So that's what I'm trying to figure out, and I know I'm still working through it, but I don't really know what the correct metric is, but I know 10%, bottom 10% it can't be the metric that we use for closure. There's got to be some other metric. Yeah.
So, taking from what you're suggesting,
Yeah.
if it's lower or significantly lower than comparable schools in that jurisdiction,
Something like that. I think that would be closer. Yeah. Okay. Like a median, there'd be like a median, maybe there's a median score, or that they're performing in the bottom quartile consistently of, of similar schools in the district.
For that, are you talking about for a certain number of years, or?
Yeah, I'm okay with the years, but it's more, my concern is more with the
metric is.
metric that we're using as the kick out.
Yeah, I mean, it depends how you do that. If you do it by county, some counties have a lot fewer schools, and then if it's compared to others that are doing really well, the school could be doing well, but it performs worse than the rest of them.
Right.
I think you give the discretion to the department with the May, and they look at the factors, and they can see that it's not, I just think it gets a little too prescriptive, and that's kind of why I was supporting that they may revoke it. I just think I think we've run into this issue on other areas when we tried to put the schooling by district and things, so.
again, I just want to get the solution. Do we want to leave it to the department to decide on the metrics?
Yes, they could, there should be a standard metric for everyone. There should be something applied that every school system is applying. I don't have the right answer for what it is now.
Offered by the department,
Yeah.
if that's any indication.
Yes, well, that's why I wouldn't want them running the program, because they don't really know how to think about this. So, yeah, that's just not a fair way at all to, it's easy for that, but it's not, it's not fair to do that.
Sure.
I am a little, sorry?
Have to reject the amendment, because as drafted with the 20%, 10%, that doesn't work at all.
Yeah, Senator, I think there's unanimity to
Yeah.
reject the amendment, but
Okay.
and I don't know where it came from, but I have that in the original language, which I'm willing to change. So in other words, if on page 10, at the bottom, I'm sorry, if we just want to, may revoke approval of a virtual school, and develop a metric, a county or state metric or something. Is that, and leave it just to them? Anybody object to that? Stacy, do you think you have that? Okay, so we've rejected their amendment. We've amended the amendments. I'm sorry. Please.
Thank you. So two things. First off, I'm not that comfortable with the county metric because there are some parts of, I mean, just my county that are affluent and the kids are going to be thriving and all that. And then there are parts of Gaithersburg or Wheaton or something where the kids are not going to do as well. And they might, so you can't compare apples and kumquats. It just doesn't work.
This wouldn't work, I guess, if it's a first-year school, but, you know, if a student performed a certain amount, if a student performed a certain way and then that dropped, I mean, you know, otherwise, so the problem is that if it's a virtual school, the children are coming from all over the county. So there's really no way to not compare it, to make it a countywide measure.
So that means then that there would be no special education, no IEPs, and no gifted and talented in virtual schools? I find that hard to imagine.
They are not excluded in this bill. But remember.
What does that mean, no? Sorry, I don't know what no means. No, there would not be
So for
special
example,
ed and gifted talented options?
a county board could decide to establish a virtual program that was all gifted and talented
Yes,
students at a high school level, if that's what they found appropriate. I mean, yeah, sure, I mean, it
So that
says,
school would never be in the bottom 10%. That seems
I-
unfair. And the
I
one
don't know.
right across the way, that's maybe for kids with disabilities, or reading challenges, or behavioral problems, or physically disabled, and they need a guardian at home, and that's safer and easier. We've seen students like
but-
that here.
But we have, if there are more students that apply, it's done by lottery. So it's hard for them to make an elite school, and it's done by lottery. And we also say they should make every effort to reflect the cultural makeup of the county. So I guess we don't know who's going to seek the school. We know it's going to be middle class, upper class, poor kids. We don't know that. We try, and I know Senator Washington, Senator Heston tried to figure this out when we looked at it, and we wanted to make it, if it's going to happen, and people don't want to be in a real setting, it's a more setting, it shouldn't be where kids are being skimmed off the top. It should be reflective of anybody having the opportunity.
It happened with charters, we know that's going to happen. So, you know, if this train has left the station, which it seems like it has, we have to know. So I don't know that we could figure it out. Well, no, I mean, we have to, there are already in other words, it's already happening. So, you know, we have to decide what our policy is around it. So if it is a lottery system, is that what we said, how it's set up?
number of applicants exceeds the placements, then it goes to a lottery system. And then there's the option of the county establishing a weighting system to give whichever groups they determine necessary an advantage, a small advantage in the lottery.
And again, Vice Chair, we have programs, and so this is separate, this is not a program. We have virtual programs. This is about the schools. So there could be a specialized program that's virtual, but they can't set up a specialized school just for, can we set up a virtual school? I guess that's the question. Can we set up a virtual school just for high-performing students? If that's the case, that should definitely not be allowed.
I want my kid who's like a genius to be with other geniuses, and my school can't accommodate her, and so therefore, this virtual thing could do that. And studying astrophysics or cybersecurity.
Yep. And there we go. Yep.
And there we go. I mean,
Because this is what happens, we pull kids out, so then we, so people don't have to move to another jurisdiction, they just put
Right.
their kid online.
Is
So
there
we don't have to
anything
worry
that-
about integrating homes, residential segregation anymore, we just segregate them into the digital space. I mean, this
Right.
again is my overall concern about this whole thing. So I think we have to, part of the guardrails have to be that you can't just create schools that are sort of specialized in that way. I mean, it's a huge problem just waiting to happen.
Ladies and gentlemen, right now, just to be clear, there are few, if any, rules of the road. The purpose here was to put some guardrails where it doesn't get out of control and get abused. Like I said from the get-go, I'm not a super big fan of this, of virtual schools, but I think we need some parameters so it doesn't get out of hand. Look, at the end of the day, I think most parents want their kids in a bricks and mortar situation. So I don't want to get into how many angels can dance on the head of a pin, and it's a non-issue. But for those that proceed, I just wanted to have some basics in place. We might not be able to solve all the questions now, and it might be a couple of years before this shakes out, whether there are 10 of these or 50 of these. And I shared that with Senator Roosevelt today. We don't know. I mean, for example, he wanted to start a department, add 4 more pins in the Department of Education. There are only like a handful of these. I mean, to hire 4 or 5 people when there are only 6 or 7 schools out there, you know, it's a bit much. So that's why, but again, this is to put some parameters to get us started on that before, you know, the horse is totally out of the barn. That's what was the purpose.
So we have this intent, this E on page 3, where it says, to the extent, line 29, to the extent practicable, the student body of a virtual school shall reflect the racial, ethnic, how do we do that?
Now,
So I'm on page of the original bill, on page 3.
3 at the top, 10 at the bottom.
This was if, for example,
Yeah.
again, I mean, if you're seeing, if you don't have enough applications to exceed the number of placements, or you do, you can start weighting the lottery to say, for example, we think the racial mix is off in these applications, and we can give a weight to students of a certain income level or a certain racial demographic or whatnot. And this would make sure that no one's disadvantaged, or the people who are disadvantaged do get, you know, a small step up to be able to participate. That's how they do it for charters, just by the way.
That's a little easy.
we're not going to be able to solve every problem. I think,
I just don't
if-
want to create, I mean, I guess don't want
but
to.
they're created now. And it's totally without any control. And I think if we see a situation where it's a one-race school or whatever, I think we'll see it. And we'll say, and we go to court and we say,
was
you're
gonna
not
say,
abiding by the
undo
law.
that.
I just don't,
Yeah,
I mean, we can spend another couple weeks to figure out what Baltimore City or Baltimore County or Howard County should do here, but I think we set the intent pretty clearly, that it's not to skim a certain class of kids.
Well, maybe it's all lottery.
Senator Ellis.
Thank you. So in thinking about the issue of the virtual school being, say, a school just for the best and the brightest. So in high school, I think students take, they choose their classes, what they want to take. Do they want to take, Algebra 1, Algebra 2, geometry, physics, or biology, chemistry? They choose, right? So it will be the same in the virtual school, where students in the school will choose what they want to take, their curriculum. So I don't think we would have can just legislate that, the school will be made up of students who want to take sewing versus home ec or any VOTEC classes, or, I mean, they will choose what they will choose. So I don't think it'd be easy to engineer a school that's just for one set of students.
Saying that this shall be a traditional school, it cannot be a special entry school. We haven't said that. And I feel like we would need to say that, Chairman. I mean, that's,
Yeah. So why would you need to say that, if, especially say at the high school level, where?
because it was just raised, because the chairwoman said if I could have a school where my kid just only went to school with other smart kids, I would do that. And, in a brick and mortar, when you take a STAR class or you take an accelerated class, you're still walking down the halls with other kids. You're going to interact with other people that are, different from you. But in this virtual environment, you would have a whole school year where you're only interacting with people who are just like you. And so I don't know that we'd want to produce those types of schools.
Now,
I
the question
know.
is, okay. Yeah, okay. Vice Chair.
Thank you. I'm changing the subject, if that's okay. I mean, I'm still in the bill. Are you in the same section? All right, I'm on page. I'm on,
I couldn't hear you, Senator Cardoza.
In this conversation, I think we've been talking about some limitations here. And again, I think part of it is, shouldn't we be giving options to address some of the issues that Senator Washington raised, which is why I think it's been implied that there's no guardrails on these programs at all. I just want to point out that this multi-district approach that the Eastern Shore Consortium has taken really serves, in this case, it serves rural areas, but it's meeting the needs. And they do have criteria in place, and which I think is important to note that, including, that the teachers are Maryland certified teachers, that there's support for these students. And I just, I think what I was hearing is we shouldn't limit the options at the local level. And so I just want to, again, raise to my committee's, my colleagues' attention, why this multi-district approach works for the Eastern Shore, where 7 of the 9 counties are participating in this type of approach.
okay. Now me? Colleagues, I want to flag, you'll see on page 11 of the packet, the one line, and then it's on page 12. I'm just going to read it. The county board shall develop an outreach and marketing campaign to provide information to the public on the availability of the virtual school option and to encourage applications from students. I hate that. I hate everything about that. So first off, that is encouraging students to go from bricks and mortar, from cross-pollination and socialization and all that, and they have to pay for a campaign to encourage parents to apply for a for-profit company that may not be as good for their kids. And that's going to be skimming off a bunch of kids from public school.
Yeah, not for-profit, that's prohibited.
Okay? In any case, so I don't know why we would
Yeah,
want to mandate
I
that.
think the thinking, and it came out of the work group, was if they've decided to go forward on a virtual school, it shouldn't be word of mouth to reinforce that it's a select group of people, that everyone should know it's available. If the decision's already been made to have Frederick County has a virtual school. I think it's elementary and middle. They got to their numbers and they froze it, and there's a waiting list, and they're not adding another school. I guess the thought was, if they say we're going to virtual school, and they only told northern Frederick County that there's a virtual school, and not other students in Frederick City, so that was the reason for this, that if they're going ahead with a virtual school, everyone should know that it's there.
So outreach and marketing, and then, so I'm going to suggest, and I don't know if a possible amendment is in order, Mr. Chairman? So I would suggest that we would modify, keep the county board shall develop an outreach campaign. I would suggest removing the words "and marketing," which makes it a bigger deal, to provide information to the public on the availability of the virtual school option, if you want, period. And the whole "and to encourage applications from students," I think is beyond the pale. So that's my motion.
Anybody?
Thank you. I support the Vice Chair's amendment, and I just want to point out that in context, this is closely linked to E on the bottom, on the packet, page 10. So we were concerned that in order to reflect the racial, ethnic, cultural, and gender identity, we might need a campaign in multiple languages. So really, E and the top of page, I guess E and F go together. And so the intent of the language is to ensure gender, cultural, language diversity. But I see your exact point. So I support the amendment, but I just want to be clear on the intent.
Identity, but the wording says gender diversity. No, that's okay. I don't know if that was an on-purpose thing.
No.
Okay.
Okay. Senator Washington, you seem unresolved on the broader issue. Let's do this. Let Senator think about it. Next couple of days, you're going to have a chance for another further amendment. Okay. Yeah. Okay. There's another amendment on the next to last page, 32. The bill says a virtual school for pre-K and K is prohibited. Most feedback over the last 2.5 years is kindergarten kids sitting in front of a screen for 6 hours isn't smart or healthy, and it's very difficult to do. For some reason, the State Board of Education is suggesting to remove that language because they say there's a successful kindergarten program in place. Up to the committee, whatever you think. On the next to last page, 32. If you look at 3 lines from the bottom, they think doing that will push people to have homeschooling. By prohibiting a kindergarten virtual school or a pre-K virtual school, which drives me crazy. But they think that's too prohibitive. They think we should remove that language. I'll follow the will of the committee on this.
No.
So I'm kind of lost here. So are you referring to the letter sent by?
Yes, at the very end, Senator.
Yeah.
We believe that not including kindergarten in this opportunity will unintentionally push families to homeschool rather than keeping them engaged.
So where's that in the bill? Supposed to amend?
Stacy, where's that in the bill?
Pull it out here. On page 10 of the packet, it says in line 5, a virtual school may not include classes for pre-kindergarten or kindergarten students.
So they want us to take that out?
They want us to say a virtual school may not include classes for pre-kindergarten students.
Short and sweet. 1 or 2 comments that we voted up or down.
As long as we can just create an exemption for the existing one, I'm comfortable with prohibiting any additional pre-K in kindergarten, the existing language. So rejecting their proposal, yeah.
But you're saying we should grandfather the existing? Yeah,
Clause would include this existing pre-kindergarten program, but
Right.
after the end of the grandfather, they would have to close.
Yeah,
Unless you want a different an amendment that they can exist in perpetuity.
Correct, you could.
no, I think kind of the way we solved the last one, which is to give them a couple years to transition, to, like, in other words, maybe they can't take in any new people, the kids can graduate or move, or they grow up, they're gone, right, so they close, yeah.
Stacy,
So
tell
they
me if
don't have
I'm
to
getting
close
this right.
today.
At some point, if they're starting at age 3 or 4 or 5, and then we give them 2 years, they're not going to allow a new class of young
Right,
young
that's it.
kids
Correct,
in.
it's the program, it's
So we give it
not
a
the
deadline.
children, per se.
Yes, there
Right.
we go, yep,
So Susie can still continue to learn, but she'll be in 3rd grade, 4th grade, blah, blah.
yep,
Okay. So essentially it gets phased out.
yes, there we go.
I make a motion to reject this suggestion.
I think.
I think that's
That's what I think
not
I'm
needed.
hearing anyway. We're not moving that. We're saying, we'll put uncodified at the end.
It's already covered.
Okay. So that means, but they will have a kindergarten class next year.
Correct.
But they won't,
If they choose to do it through the 2023-2024 school year. And then after that, the program would have to, if this bill gets adopted, it would have to cease to exist.
okay, any objection to the Washington, amendment, being non-adopted? Any other amendments?
We went, at the beginning, you were talking about your amendments and Senator Rosapep's amendments, and I'm not quite sure which of his amendments we've adopted and which ones we haven't. I wouldn't mind council walking us through his amendments,
Sure.
although,
So we could, they're not long, actually. So if you're starting on page 22 of your packet, that's the reprint. Senator Rosapep has a substantial number of preamble clauses. And then the next change he has is on page 25.
these, right?
We haven't done anything with his amendments. We've only adopted Senator Pinsky's amendments. We've rejected the amendment offered by MSDE. We have not even offered the State Board of Education amendments, decided not to move them.
Incorporated a
Right.
couple of his.
Okay.
And when we get to them, we can show you where we incorporated.
Right,
I
right.
did not add 8 whereas to my.
We have rejected the preamble language in Senator Pinsky's. So on page 25, starting at line 10,
What about 24, Stacy?
what is that? He offered no amendments on that page.
Training and skills that our language?
That is your language, sir. That is actually for the educator prep programs. So educator prep programs have to incorporate in their program training in the skills and techniques for teaching effectively in a virtual learning environment. That was in the original bill. So on page 25, around line 10, Senator Rosapep offers, in lieu of establishing a virtual school, a county board may enter a written agreement with another county board that has established a virtual school to allow its students to enroll in the virtual school in the other county. Also on that page, in line 30, he strikes cultural from that list of items to be considered when you're considering the enrollment of students in the school. I don't know what it means. I don't know.
Cultural, Senator Croza. sorry, before,
First Amendment with the whereas, Senator.
Subsection E, line 10? Okay.
A county board may enter to a written agreement with another county board, but again, trying to apply some flexibility, does that also mean multi-county, given the economies of scale on the shore?
It says another county board, it doesn't limit it to a specific number. So my interpretation would be that would be at least 2 and more than 2.
23 counties could,
I think that's called the department, right?
Yeah, Stacy,
Yes.
what would the process be if 6 jurisdictions wanted to do a regional school like they did and got the approval for the existing school under this bill? Put aside this language for a minute.
Under your bill as
Yes.
introduced? So they would, my assumption would be, and I'm only making an assumption, is that one county board would start, and then they would enter into some sort of MOU with other existing counties. It would have to be a nonprofit that was running the show. It couldn't be a for-profit entity. It would have to meet the requirements in the definition. So in order to be a virtual school, it would, let me see here. The majority of the instruction would have to be via the internet in a virtual remote setting. And so that means, but they would also have to, this was the harder part, would be that all of the students would have to be given access to the various wraparound services, athletic services, extracurricular activities at their zoned school. So, I mean, it would definitely be a challenge, but
Well, that's what the multi-district consortium's doing now. They receive those services from their local schools.
and then they have the teacher requirements. So right now, the consortium, as they say, is run for a for-profit entity. The teachers may be certified in Maryland, but they're not employees of the county board, and they don't fall under the collective bargaining agreement, which would be a requirement under this bill.
Right, I understand that. The section I'm talking about is the ability for these counties, which this amendment allows, for these county boards to enter into agreements with other county boards. Obviously, in this case, we're talking about on the shore, it's 7 out of 9, and we can work with the Maryland Department, that could be something we could work with the Maryland Department of Education possibly to see what they're currently doing, how it might apply here.
I was sorry, I mean, I was answering Senator Pinsky's question to say, how would that work under the bill, the structure of the bill? That's what I was answering.
Question is, are 6 jurisdictions, if they follow the rest of the law, precluded from applying for a school code?
With your amendments that you just adopted, no, because there was some revisions to the teacher requirements that would allow them to be, an employee of the county or a collaborating county, and under the collective bargaining agreement of that county. Under the original bill, they wouldn't, because they would have to be an employee of the county that established the virtual school. So,
So,
here,
again, just some-
take a look on page, this'll help, is when you can see it. On page 28, because that's your language in the bill before it was amended. Starting on line 8, a teacher employed by a virtual school shall have a teacher's certificate issued by the state superintendent, be an employee of the county that established the virtual school, subject to subsection B, be subject to the collective bargaining agreement of that jurisdiction, and have access to professional development. So under the consortium agreement, any teacher would have to be an employee of the county that established the virtual school. So I'm not sure how they could survive under the original bill. But with your amendments, we can take a look at page 14. starting at line 8, and some of these amendments were MSEA had suggested, is a teacher assigned to a virtual school shall have a teacher certificate issued by the state superintendent or any other relevant professional certification authorized under COMAR. Teachers or education support personnel assigned to work in a virtual school shall be an employee of the county that established the virtual school or a collaborating county. And subject to this, be subject to a collective bargaining agreement of that jurisdiction.
So Senator Carrozza, I have no objection to the consortium existing with multiple jurisdictions, and there's nothing in the bill that prohibits it. So my only concern with Senator Rosa Pepps is we're going to run into the same problems we had when we tried to pass your bill 2 years ago of getting Senator Hester's bill 2 years ago of getting the two counties to agree on resources and what students. So the regional consortium on the Eastern Shore, if they want to come together and do this under these rules, more power to them. I'm not trying to block that. I'm not sure if Senator Rosa Pepps' amendment raises more questions than it answers, because as Ms. Goodman said, I think the bill allows a consortium to set up a school.
Right, it was the intent that not to disrupt having these more innovative agreements. It was just to put the guidelines and make sure that teachers were given according to Senator Pinsky, make sure they were given appropriate wages and access to the collective bargaining agreement.
So are there any other amendments from Senator Roosevelt?
Yes, sorry.
I'm sorry. Senator?
Yeah, Ms. Goodman, with the requirement that the teachers be certified and professionals, so with the teacher shortage, if there are vacancies, there's need for substitutes, will the district have to pull out certified teachers from, say, brick and mortar to have them go to virtual school? Or will they still have that flexibility to have, say, a long-term sub or someone who's not?
It doesn't talk about substitutes. I don't know exactly what the rules are on substitutes and certification, but it does require the teacher that's assigned to a virtual school to be certified. The regulations do allow for adjuncts to be able to come in and do short-term work. That would be authorized, but again, that's already an existing law. It's already for bricks and mortar students. It just gives virtual schools parity or makes them comparable to what's in existing schools.
Great, thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Yeah, Senator, it'll just follow whatever happens in a bricks and mortar school. Okay.
Okay.
You said there were a couple of other.
Just a few. If you move all the way to page 29, that's where the next amendment, and that begins where he is establishing this new Maryland Virtual Schools Network in the department. It discusses what the purpose of that is.
But we also adopted midway.
Right.
We adopted the amendment under 7-1410.
Correct.
Okay.
It says the department shall hire 3 employees to staff this network. At the bottom of page 29, it starts, there is a quality online education grant. It states the purpose of the grant, but it does not provide mandatory funding. Further on page 30, it begins, there's an establishment of this Quality Online Education Advisory Committee in the department and discusses the responsibilities of that advisory committee and who would be on it. And it says the department shall request that members from relevant nonprofit and for-profit organizations and college teacher trainings engaged in online education designate individuals. So there's a whole list of people who designate various individuals. There's a reporting requirement on there, and that is the end of Senator Rosa Pepps' amendments.
As I mentioned in our amendments, we told the superintendent to designate a person to oversee this, coordinate best practices, and seek advisory if they need it. This new bureaucracy that's suggested when there are only a half a dozen or a dozen schools, I think is overkill, but what a shock. Well,
These amendments are on page 15, starting line 16.
almost done.
It says the state superintendent may assign the duties related to the oversight of virtual schools to the appropriate office or division within the department. These duties shall include the development, compilation, and updating of best practices for teaching and learning in a virtual environment, provision of services, and the operation and administration of virtual schools, liaising with county boards that operate virtual schools or other stakeholders, and authorizes them to establish an advisory committee should they so choose.
Okay, Senator Carrozza, I think I saw Carrozza in the vice chair.
All right, sorry here. So this role of the state about the best practices for teaching on page 15, and then going back to page 7, the whole teacher preparation. How, I guess what I don't understand how this will work in practicality. Does this mean certain teachers express an interest in wanting to teach in a virtual school? Does it mean, you know, if you're starting from scratch on this, how do you do this teacher prep part? And how does that impact current operations in that school or school district?
As I know in Frederick County, as they shared with us, the superintendent of Frederick County, they decided to have a virtual school a few years ago. I think it might have, I don't know if it predated or not, the pandemic. They asked for volunteer staffers from the county. They trained them. They opened it up to people to apply for it. They had to have the curriculum ready to teach it, and a lot of it was synchronous, and I don't know about all of it. And people applied for it. They took as many spots as they could, and then people who weren't accepted are on a waiting list. And they've been doing it for a couple years, and they say they've got pretty decent results.
So I just want to understand, are we recruiting new teachers for it when there's a teacher shortage now, or we're letting existing teachers opt to go virtual?
It's up to each county. We're not telling the counties how to do this. If the counties, look, they have X amount of dollars to run X amount of schools. If they pull 400 kids, they're going to have fewer kids in other schools. And whether they ask first for transfers from people who've been there 10 years, or they decide to hire new employees, it's like anytime they staff, a new school opens up in Worcester County, they develop a process. They either say you can transfer into it, or they might put some new teachers into it. We're leaving that to the county. We're not telling them how to do it.
So the way it would work is you've got, the locals have the discretion on how they set up, how they basically structure it with their teachers. And also at the same time, you're opening it up to say, you first have to figure out how many students you have. So I'm just trying to understand how that process comes together, but I realize.
They decide how many seats they want to have in it, and then they decide how many teachers they need to staff it. So in Howard County or Garrett County, if they want to do a virtual school, they will say, we'll do it for elementary and we'll have 200 slots. 200 slots translates to X number of teachers. They will ask for volunteers, or they'll seek new teachers who want to teach virtually. And I assume they've done a survey to know there's enough interest to fill 200 slots. I mean, this is what happens all the time in school systems for the last 50 years. We're not touching that.
I think what's different, though, is students have an option, at least in our consortium, it's supposed to support students who need or desire an alternative to in-person instruction. And that number is uncertain because we're in this virtual age, as opposed to when a bricks and mortar is built, you have an idea of how many students you'll serve. So
But
that's why
Senator,
I'm just trying to
every
understand.
county will decide how many slots they want to have. They might have 50 and have a long waiting list. They might call for 500 and not fill it. But that's the county's business. I mean,
I just wanted to understand how it was going to work with the teachers, because we're putting in new criteria for a teaching prep program, and I just wanted to understand how we were recruiting those teachers. And I understand it's up to the locals, but it's something that I think policy-wise that. Oh, I'm not objecting to it, I'm trying to understand it.
24 jurisdictions have not objected to it. They feel it gives them enough flexibility. And that section of the bill, they're fine with. They will, look, some counties aren't going to have a virtual school. Half the counties probably won't have virtual schools. A few will. If they do, these are the rules of the road, and we don't tell them how many students to do. We don't even explain what the training should be. You want people who are going to be doing this to know what the hell they're doing. So I think we're reading a little too much into it, but.
Prep was in recognition of this previous year where teachers were thrown into this virtual environment and had no professional development or training. And this was to make sure that educator prep programs are kept up to speed with existing practice now in schools so that they can start designing courses that give this option to students in these programs.
That's okay. Could everybody go to page 13, back before all the amendments? And this is in the original bill before the amendments. I'm in section 7-1405, and I just have questions, and maybe the council can help us here. So first off, lines 12 and 13, information on the closest public facility that offers access to a computer and internet connection. So the first question is, how do you do a virtual school if you have to go to a school to get an internet connection?
Senator, that's actually existing language
I know
from
that.
the law. So this was probably before the state had one-on-one in terms of students and technology. And so students who wanted to participate and to make sure that it was available to all students and not just to students who had computers, that if they decided to do this, they could say to students, even if you don't have internet access in your area, here's some suggestions for places you could go to get that internet access.
Okay, I understand everything you just said. I think a virtual school is about school and not one-on-one, and I would think that every student would need to be able to have internet connection at home or wherever it is that the student was studying. So that's question one. Question two, and this is in the bill, I'm on lines 20 and 21, access to food and nutrition services and healthcare services. So that offers economic diversity to the student body potentially, but I'm wondering what sort of mandate that is on our.
It's the same as, so the intent here is that schools, brick and mortar schools already supply these services to students when they enroll.
Correct.
This is a public school, and in a public school, they need to provide these services. And when the county establishes a virtual program, they need to figure out how to get these students these established services.
I totally get all that, but if you've got 250 kids in a school, you open the cafeteria and 250 kids come and get come and get
Remember, these
lunch
students
or breakfast.
are from throughout the entire county for the virtual
That's
school.
exactly what I'm talking about.
So
do
you
you
might
have like a,
have 5 that come from one school and they go to that school to get it, and not every student is necessarily going to have breakfast or lunch or participate in those healthcare services, so.
And it also says above it, to the extent practicable. So we basically replicate all the services that are provided in the school so people are not disadvantaged. And we have language on participating in sports.
So this next section is the information that the virtual school must provide to the student when they enroll. Then there's another section on here that deals with the services that the virtual school is required to provide. That's on page 12. So it says, a virtual school shall provide each enrolled student access to the following services. This is on page 12 in line 14. To the extent practicable, extracurricular activities at the public school, and notwithstanding any other law or regulation, and subject to a participation agreement between the public school and the parent, participation in organized athletics and athletic teams, wraparound services, food and nutrition services, and healthcare services.
so Stacy, if you look at, that's page 12.
Right.
7-1404. My question was on page 13, 7-1405.
Right?
And it's some of that same language, but it doesn't have to the extent practicable.
Right, because this is information materials on that. The other one is what they have to provide, and this section is just, when the student enrolls, you've got to give the kids and the parents information about all the services that your school is providing. And that means informational materials on your policies, attendance, access to these various services, their technology requirements, cybersecurity policy.
Okay, I can read it.
So-
I got it. I'm still troubled by the fact that they might have to go to the school, even though they're in a virtual school, that to get an internet connection, they have to actually go to the school.
Now, it says elsewhere that computer must be provided.
Then why don't we fix this?
Well, it's just old language, we just didn't, we didn't
I think
cut
we
it
ought
out.
to,
If you want to cut it out, I guess we can cut it out.
I think we should make it, if we're updating the language, I think we ought to update the language.
Perfectly fine to do that.
Okay,
but,
Stacy, you
yeah.
can, page 13, lines 12 and 13. So, Stacy, I defer to you on what makes sense within the realm of the whole bill, but I think that number 2 there on lines 12 and 13 don't make any sense.
Okay, any objection to taking that out?
Well, may I object a little bit? Because not every house has access to an internet connection, as we learned this
Right.
past year. And so it says public facility. It doesn't say public school, it says a public facility. So that means if there's a library available, then that student can go to the library and still participate in the virtual school. So I would just to say, I'm giving you some advice here, that I think that it might be inappropriate to take out at least that part about internet connection, because it gives all kids access instead of just kids who might have it at their house.
Okay, so I'm going to vigorously disagree. I think if kids are going to be in a virtual school, I don't want them to have to trump off the library. If they're going to go to the library, they can go to the damn school building. So, I just don't even understand that. I want the kids, if they're going to do a virtual home schooling thing because of disabilities in learning or social or whatever reason people are choosing that, they ought to have a computer, they ought to have internet access so they can fully participate in this virtual school.
The only problem, we're offering,
I don't know,
again,
it's funny. Yeah.
we don't, look, there's not pure internet in every home.
Correct.
I think, look, again, I'm not a big fan of this, but the idea of saying we're going to go into, if you get accepted, we're going to put internet into your home or into your home.
You're going to give them a MiFi. You're going to do the same thing that school systems had to do during the pandemic, and you're going to give them a tablet, and you're going to give them a MiFi thing, and that's what virtual school students would have to have.
It's the choice of a parent, and I think if you're moving toward an inclusive school environment and the parent has chosen for whatever reason, and I'm not in a position to say what that reason might be, It could be bullying issues or anything other issues. It's not necessarily just access. There's many reasons somebody might choose it, and I'm just saying that giving them, talking about public facilities that might have an internet connection, that means you're only limiting students who have a device in their home, and I'm not sure if that would be the intent. So, I mean, but it's your call.
But let me, on page 14, it says, shall provide the appropriate digital device to a student to participate in the virtual school if required.
So I could say taking out computer, but my concern with taking out internet connection is the inclusivity issue that I think many people object to. That would be my concern. That was just, if you choose to take it out, that's obviously the decision of the committee. I'm just raising an issue.
Okay. Senator Washington.
I would strongly oppose taking it out. There are a number of scenarios. I think it should stay there. I get what you're saying, but the reality is that even if they had a device, that access is not universal. Students had all kinds, they got a device from the school, but the internet connection was unreliable. And so if a parent says, oh, it's in the school, I mean, it's in the library, that's great. The point is, and that allows for the flexibility of receiving the instruction. So to me, it doesn't matter where they find the connection. They could be sitting in their car.
Okay, Senator.
I agree. I think I was lit up before you, but you made my point exactly, so I don't want to belabor the point. I agree.
You still want to address it?
Yeah.
Okay. The good senator would like to remove that language, the existing language. Those that would support removing it, signify by saying aye.
Aye. Forget it, Mary Beth, we've already gone over.
On line 13, Senator Kagan has offered to remove the language information on the closest public facility that offers access to a computer and internet connection. I think that Senator Washington objected to removing internet objection, but I don't know if you also objected to removing computer.
They don't have to be in their home. So it seemed like the existing language didn't matter where you got the computer or where you got the connection. So that's, to me, what the original language would imply, so. Yeah.
code entirely. So a lot of the amendments that people have given me have to do with the all-electric building code. If Senator Pinsky's amendments are adopted, those amendments potentially become moot. So just
Yeah.
flagging that.
Without, in 30 seconds,